All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for being here. So we're going to get started. And once again, we're going to talk about this accessibility toolkit that we've developed as part of our Open Doors collaboration. So we've had this grant since 2015. We've had three kind of iterations of it. For the first was from 2015 to 2018, and then 2018 to 2020, and then 2020 to 2023. And so what we're doing right now is we've wanted to come up with this final kind of project where we take all of the amazing resources that we've developed over the years and we put them in one spot for the community. And the best idea that we could come up with to do that was that we would build a little website where folks could, from the community, could come and access the resources as they need them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go over the website page by page. What I will say, a couple disclaimers. The first is I don't have the URL for this website quite yet. I'm not entirely sure where it's going to be housed. When I have that information, it will be sent out to the community so you know exactly where to access it. We still need to publish it on the county website and do some of those pieces. So the logistical pieces will be sent out to you once we send out this recording and some further information. But let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. And can folks see the screen? If folks can maybe just give me a thumbs up. I see a few thumbs up. That's great. Okay, so here's kind of what we're going to do today is we're just going to go over this page by page. And once again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. You're welcome to interrupt me, whatever feels good, and we'll go over it. And then at the end, we'll have some time for suggestions, feedback, all of that stuff. So this is our home page here. We're calling this the Accessibility Toolkit for Domestic and Sexual Violence and Disability Programs in Multnomah County. So the intended audience for this website is both for our domestic and sexual violence programs here in Multnomah County in our continuum, but also our really wonderful disability programs. We know that so many folks work with survivors of domestic and sexual violence, and the intent is that this is inclusive of all of those programs that work with survivors. So we start here and we've got this really great welcome message. To the left here, you'll see that we've got these little open doors. If you participated in Open Doors and you would like one of these, I made little fairy doors. This is my version of what the door that you all opened looks like to me. And so this is our little introduction that talks about what Open Doors is. It says that, we stopped receiving funding at the end of this month, which is when our grant funding ends. But that we hope that this website is going to serve as a really helpful resource for the programs in our area. And then, of course, if you have questions, our main contact point is going to be my manager, Alex Sanchez, who's the manager of the Domestic and Sexual Violence Coordination Office. If you scroll down just a little bit, this is where we're going to house the recording of today's meeting, and it'll be here. So in case folks are like, where do I start on this website? We're going to have a nice little tour right there. So at the top here, you're going to see some navigation bars. This is the home page right here where we're at. We have a few different sections here. The first is who we are, and it has a few subpages. Then we have tools, which houses the tools that we've developed. And then lastly, we have resources, which houses some resources that might be educational in nature and might also connect folks with local resources in the area. If you scroll down here to the bottom of this page as well, you can navigate to those same pages. It's just another spot or another way to navigate. So this one, for example, goes to who we are. This one here goes to tools, and this one goes to resources. And at the bottom of every page, we've got this little footer note here I'm not going to hover over it because it blanks it out, but it says, this project is supported by our grant. This is just a basic thing that we have to put as a project that's supported by the Office of Violence Against Women. But I'm going to scroll up. Do we have any questions so far? So sorry. Are there any questions so far on our first homepage here? Right. And also, quick disclaimer, I unfortunately can't share the link to this. I can only do a screen share right now because it's not published. So I apologize that I can't give you a direct link to access this website as we go along, and that the best option right now I have is screen sharing. All right, we're going to move on to the Who We Are page. So I'm just going to click right here. And this is our landing page for Who We Are. This is not one of our subpages. This page here talks about our collaboration and who we are. So once again, we began in 2015. We focus on improving the service system for survivors with disabilities, and we do that in a variety of ways. We've done that through assessing physical and digital spaces and making recommendations to increase accessibility. We've reviewed organizational policies and procedures. We've offered training and technical assistance, and we've also provided community training and education. And it also lists some of our community partners here, which we'll go over on another page. And then down here, this links to our subpages as well. We're going to talk about Lizzie McNeff, who we're named after, and then our collaboration partners. Any questions about this landing Who We Are page before we carry on? All right, great. So I'm going to navigate, once again, you can navigate here, but I'm going to navigate up here on our toolbar. We're going to start with the Lizzie McNeff page. Quick disclaimer, this page is unfinished. I'm waiting on a bio from our wonderful partners at DART. I still need to work with them on this page. And Lizzie McNeff is who our Open Doors collaboration is named after. And so we wanted to honor Lizzie McNeff's memory and have a page about her on our website so that folks could know who we're named after and all of the amazing contributions that Lizzie has made to our wonderful community of survivors. So Lizzie's bio is going to go here. And then we also have a little bit about DART, the Disability Awareness Resource Team, and the work that they do as well. So that's what this page is going to be. Once again, it's unfinished and that's on me, but I'm going to work with DART to fill this in. So you can expect that when it'll be published, and it'll have more information about the wonderful Lizzie McNeff. Then if we go back up to our navigation pane up here, we'll go down to our collaboration partners. And this talks about the wonderful collaboration partners that we've had as part of Open Doors. This is in two different sections here. We talk about first our MOU partners and the folks that we signed on to collaborate with us in this grant. We've had several over the years. The first is our Domestic and Sexual Violence Coordination Office. The second is the Disability Awareness Resource Team. And then we have NAIA and Independent Living Resources. We also have Call to Safety, Raphael House of Portland, and Multnomah County Aging and Disability and Veteran Services. And if you click on each of these, it links to their individual websites as well. So if folks are interested in learning more about our collaboration partners, you can always go and learn more about them on their individual websites. Also, for any image that you might see on our website, we do have alt text. So in case folks have questions about the image that they're seeing, it does have alt text, or alternative text, they should say, which is accessible for screen readers if folks have low vision or if they're blind. If we scroll down, we also have our other collaboration partners. These are the folks that were not our MOU partners, but they volunteered their time, which is really wonderful. And so we wanted to recognize them as well. That includes Volunteers of America, their Home Free program, Disability Rights Oregon, New Avenues for Youth, specifically their New Day program, and Multnomah County Divert, their Domestic Violence Enhanced Response Team. And once again, this will link to each of their individual programs. Any questions before we move on to our tools and resources, where I think we're going to get into a little bit more of the meat of what we're sharing with the community? All right. Well, let me start with tools. So tools is just one page. As you notice, these other two have drop down. Tools we just put into one. So tools contains all of the tools that our collaboration have developed for your use. When we go to the resources, which we'll go over next, these are more educational resources and things that you might want to learn about disability justice, disability rights. Maybe you want to get some more education about domestic and sexual violence and disability. That's where you'd go. But we're going to start with tools, which specifically talks about, once again, the tools that we've developed as a collaboration. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time on this page, and folks might have some questions now that we're getting into the specific tools that we've developed. We're going to start first with our policy and procedure review tool. So this policy and procedure review tool was developed a few years ago, but we just sent in a updated version that we hope is a little bit more inclusive now in a post-COVID world. So I'm actually going to open this up so folks can view it. Can folks see this? The tool, or I never know how Google works. Or am I sharing can you see the policy and procedure review tool, or are you back on the web page?
I can see McNeff's Open Doors for Survivors with Disabilities.
Okay, that's perfect. When I share my screen, it always confuses me because I don't know which window I'm sharing, but thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk about this policy and procedure review tool, which is the first tool that we've developed here. So this is something that you can use at your own individual organization, which can help you review your existing policies and procedures to make sure that they're accessible for folks with disabilities that may be accessing your organization. So we're going to scroll down here, and this is where you'd put the policy, all of your basic information here. And then we've got, I think it's like 15 questions that you can ask yourself to see if it's accessible. So for example, we've got this first question here. Is the purpose of the policy clear? Which may seem like a basic question, but maybe it's really not. So we've got some definitions, like what does that actually mean? Here's some sample language to make sure that the purpose of your policy is clear. And when you're reviewing it, it's got this nice little chart so you can go by and check, well, yes, it is clear. Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm not sure, or it doesn't apply. And you can add some little comments. So this serves as like a little fill in the blank tool. So we have, is the purpose of the policy clear? Does the policy follow its stated purpose? Does the policy use plain language? And we have some more, when we get into resources, we'll talk more about plain language. Does the policy incorporate language that empowers and values people with disabilities? So this talks both about using person-first language or identity-first language. It also might talk about how folks refer to themselves. Maybe they don't identify as being a person with a disability, but they might still qualify for services. We have some examples of terms that maybe you would want to use instead of using other terms, right? We also have, is the policy person-centered? Does the policy take into account people with disabilities, especially those who may experience more marginalization? This is one that we added in our most recent iteration of this policy and procedure review tool. We really wanted to highlight that even within our own disability community, there are some communities that may experience more marginalization than others. So maybe folks who are deaf and hard of hearing, or folks with invisible disabilities, or maybe folks who are blind and low vision. We wanted to make sure that we're really highlighting folks who may often not have the resources dedicated to them, and that the policies that we write are inclusive of all folks with disabilities. And so that was important to us to include. Next, we separately wrote, does the policy take into account persons who are deaf and hard of hearing? Once again, folks who are deaf and hard of hearing have specific cultural considerations, and we felt that it was important to include that as a separate point. And then once again, we included, does the policy take into account people with COVID-19 or long COVID? Once again, we felt that this was a special population that we wanted to put as its own question now, right, in as we've experienced a mass disabling event. And we noticed that I think a lot of people are trying to shift back to normal. We want to make sure that people are paying close attention and keeping COVID in mind as we move into this next phase. We also wanted to include, does this policy take into account survivors who have experienced domestic and sexual violence? It's super important, right, that we are keeping in mind the people that we serve. Is there an associated procedure? Is the procedure clear and easy to understand? Are the supporting procedures and guidelines consistent with the policy? Is the policy and procedure consistent with trauma-informed care principles? And does the policy and procedure take into account the support and safety of the person served? We have two more here. Does the policy take into account the support and safety of staff? And then lastly, does the policy take into account any relevant principles of disability justice? Once again, it's really important for us as a coalition that we feel grounded in the disability justice movement, and we felt that it was important to include the 10 principles, which are widely, it's a framework that is very important to the disability justice movement. So once again, this is a tool that you can use at your own organization to make sure that your policies are inclusive. And it's a really nice, easy to use tool. Once again, you can just check yes, no, and add some comments. We've been using this as a tool to review policies that have come to our team when folks have requested technical assistance, and this has been really great to use. Let me scroll back up to the top here. Do folks have any questions on this tool so far or its use? It's pretty self-explanatory, but if folks do have any questions, you're welcome to reach out afterwards. So I'm going to close this tool. And we're going to go back and look at this section here. And once again, if you click on this, it links. This also opens in a new tab as well. The other piece that we have here is maybe you want a second set of eyes. Maybe your organization has used this tool and you're like, gosh, I really would love someone who's done this before to review my policy for accessibility. We have some really great folks who would definitely be willing to do that for you. So I have here to contact Alex Sanchez, and they'll get in touch with one of our Open Doors members that can help you review your tool or your organization's policy for accessibility as well. Any questions on our policy and procedure review tool before we move on to the next one? Okay, great. Next, we have a few sample policies and procedures. These are policies and procedures that we created that you're able to use at your own organization. We have a few of them here. I don't have this last one linked. It's not finished yet, and I didn't want to link it quite yet, but it will be there by the time it's done. So I have two right here. The first one is an accommodations policy and procedure, and the second is like 4 different procedures wrapped into one, but it's really cool. So we're going to start here. And with these, I'm not going to go super in depth because they're a little beefy and I want you to have the time to review them on your own. We're going to start with the accommodations policy and procedure. I kind of view this as my magnum opus. It's a pretty lengthy, awesome document, in my opinion. I think it's pretty cool. But what this has here is you'll see the format here. We start with saying, we created the sample policy for use in Multnomah County, and we recommend that organizations tailor it to your needs. It's a great starting point, but it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. So we're going to start here. We go over, it's got, you're going to enter your organization name here. It lists those things in bold, so you would just kind of fill in the blank. And here we start with our policy, and then it goes down to a nice little graphic, which can be really helpful and accessible. We go into our procedure, and then we've got some appendix documents. So like for folks who would request accommodations, maybe this is the accommodation request form, for example, that folks would request their accommodations through. We also have at the back what we call a resource guide. We recognized with reasonable accommodations, and this is for employment reasonable accommodations, not for like a participant requesting a reasonable accommodation to participate in a program. That the reasonable accommodation can be really tricky both for employees and employers, and maybe folks don't have the information that they need. So what we wanted to do, separate from a policy and procedure, was provide a supplemental resource guide that contained maybe some additional information about the Americans with Disabilities Act and the process of getting a reasonable accommodation that maybe didn't fit in a policy and procedure, but would still be really helpful to have. So in here we have some, definitions of the that may be helpful. We also have information on additional steps throughout the policy or throughout the procedure that may be helpful. For example, we talk about how long it may take for someone to meet with you and discuss your accommodation. We talk about when documentation is needed. Medical documentation isn't always needed in a reasonable accommodation, and a lot of people don't know that. So we wanted to include the supplemental information both for employers and employees in an urge to protect people in an accommodation process, which can often be really difficult. So that's why this packet, as you'll see, it's like 19 pages long, but the policy and procedure isn't that long. Most of it is this resource guide in the back. Any questions before we move on? Once again, this isn't going over it, but this is essentially the sample policy here that you all can take a look at once this is published. But any questions about this policy here? All right, and I'll move on to our next one. Our next policy, once again, is kind of like a 4-in-1. We had a whole bunch of different, this was before I became the project director, but we had like 4 different policies that all kind of had to do the same thing with each other. We had an informed consent, confidentiality, breach of confidentiality, and a release of information. And those all felt very relevant to each other. So we included them in one. So for example, this is our informed consent policy and procedure. And then if you scroll down, we have our confidentiality one. And then we have our breach of confidentiality. And then we have a release of information example that can be helpful. That's what this one is. And then lastly, we have a service or companion animal policy and procedure that's still in the works, but it'll be done very shortly. And that'll be linked here as well. Lastly, we wanted to link this other really great resource from one of our community partners. This is from the Victim Rights Law Center, and they have this really cool plain language release of information that's already been approved by, they received a grant from the Office of Violence Against Women as well. And we wanted to link this in case folks wanted to use it as well. It's a great tool. And this is what it looks like. Any questions before we move on to the next section? This is just our sample policies and procedures that we've developed. Any questions on these so far? All right, we're going to jump down now to our safety and access review tool. The safety and access review tool is used for reviewing a location to assess for accessibility. This tool was originally created by an organization, or I think it's a collaboration called Weave of Kent County. It includes organizations like the YWCA and I think other folks that are focused on sexual violence and disability. And what we did was we adapted it for use in Multnomah County. So I'm going to open it, and this is, once again, a pretty beefy document, and you're going to see why. I think this one is like 85 pages, and I promise it's not you're reading line by line 85 pages. We'll get into it, and you'll see why it's so long. So we're going to start here with this table of contents. It has here all the different areas that it breaks it up to that you can assess for accessibility. So like your agency location, maybe you want to look at your parking lot area, maybe you want to look at your office area or your restrooms that you have, and you want to assess all of those different locations for accessibility. We're going to scroll down here, we're going to skip the introduction. And this is why it's so long, is that this is what all of the pages look like. So we'll start with, I'm actually going to skip agency location. We're going to get to a more specific one like parking lot. So it has really cool stuff like this where you can start to, it asks you really cool questions about the location. So for example, the first question is, are there accessible parking spaces marked with the international symbol of accessibility? And maybe your organization does, or they don't have them. And so you'd mark yes, no, or maybe it doesn't apply to me. Are there enough accessible parking spaces for clients, staff, and visitors? And they give you a really cool metric. It says 25% of the total number of parking spaces provided. Another one, are accessible parking spaces for cars 9 feet wide? And it gives you more specific information. So this is a very detailed document that gives you specific information to assess your organization for accessibility. And it goes through all of the different locations that you might have on site. It talks about things like, is your location welcoming? So for example, is the area around the parking lot clean? Are signs accessible and easy to read? They talk about personal safety here. Is the location free from congestion and noise? Is the location well lit and visible? And then lastly, they have a few other questions here. One is general questions where you can say, let me list all of the really great things about my location and some of the challenging aspects of the location. They also have some optional questions here, like, do you feel safe in the parking lot? What do you like about it? What do you dislike? Those kind of things. And they do this for every section. If we go back up to the table of contents, they have this for all of these areas, and they're once again super detailed. I think this is a really great tool for folks to use if they want to assess accessibility at their own organization. Any questions before I close out of this document? Great. So once again, that's our safety and access review tool. We also have this cool note that says, hey, are you interested in having one of our experts come and review your organization's location for accessibility? We have, once again, some really great folks from our Open Doors collaboration that have done many site reviews and are willing to come help you assess your site for accessibility if you'd be interested in that. So what you do is you'd contact Alex Sanchez and get in touch with them, and we'd put you in touch with the folks from our collaboration to do a site review. Any questions here about our safety and access review tool or having a site review at your organization before we move on to our next section?
Yeah, Emily, I'm just thinking about it would be nice to have one at my organization, but I don't know if the request should come from me necessarily, or if it would, I'm guessing need to come through the higher ups that be. And I would just pass on Alex's information to them, or?
Great question. I would definitely, we can get in touch after this meeting and we can figure out a plan and we can talk about kind of what we offer and like what this could look like. So let's definitely get in touch after the meeting and we can talk about it.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Okay, great. We're going to move on to our next, I think this might be one of our final sections on this page. We're going to talk about training and education. We hosted, part of what we did during our Open Doors collaboration was that we hosted a series of trainings. One of these was called Connectors Meetings, which we tried to host about quarterly, and those topics focused on our connection and work. We also hosted different community partners for trainings, and we also provided other trainings to community partners, which was really neat. So we have a few examples of the trainings that we hosted as a collaboration. For example, we provided Domestic and Sexual Violence and Disability 101 training to a couple partners. We hosted Serving Sexual Assault Survivors with Disabilities. That was the training that we did for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And we also invited some community partners to host some training. This was by Portland Street Response. It's responding to people who are houseless and disabled. We did one on domestic violence and sexual assault and neurodivergence. We did one on long COVID, and we also did one for working with folks who experience delusions, hear voices, see visions, that kind of thing. So we've got a quick note here where we have, once again, we have some really great folks in our collaboration that would be willing to continue offering training. And we have a contact here, Elizabeth McKeever, who's really wonderful. She works for Raphael House, and she is the lead for the Family Violence Coordinating Council Training Subcommittee. And so if your organization is interested on receiving training on topics surrounding domestic and sexual violence and disability, what you'd do is you'd contact Elizabeth. We can have both some of our Open Doors folks come in and host a training like these ones here that we've offered, or we can also make recommendations for really great community partners like these folks that we've hosted that have come in and provided training to our Open Doors folks. Any questions about some of the trainings that we've hosted or that we can offer to community partners and how to get in touch about that?
Emily, will we get this information from you later after the training? Because I would love to. I'd love to, talk about being in touch with you guys about just knowing more that, like there's a lot that I want to communicate around this. So just whatever way that you recommend.
Sure, yeah. So what we'll do is this website will be published. I'm not entirely sure what the URL is going to be yet, but when I figure that out, it'll all be sent out. But after this meeting, what I'll do is in a follow-up email, I'll make sure to have all of these contacts listed. So if you want a site review, contact this person. If you're still interested in training and education, make sure to email Elizabeth, those kind of things. So folks know who the key people to go to are, in addition to having this website.
Beautiful. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, absolutely. So once again, with training and education, this is just a brief kind of summary of what we've done. We also have 3 of our connectors meetings that we hosted here. We had more connectors meetings. These are just the ones that we've had recordings for. The first is our long COVID training, which is incredible. If folks are really interested in how long COVID works, I think this is good information for anyone, whether you're working with survivors or not. I'm sure everyone has someone in their life that has been impacted by COVID. This is a great training. This one we hosted during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. This one was hosted by myself and a great colleague, Kirsten Adkerson. And then this one was hosted by Morgan Hunter. This is working with survivors with neurodivergence. And Morgan is with the Autism Society of Oregon. So these 3 will be on our website, and they're for your viewing and education. Any questions before we move on to this final section? All right, great. And lastly, we just have a couple of other tools that we recommend. This first one is an audit tool for organizations, and this one is for BIPOC organizations specifically. And it opens here in a new tab. And it's really cool. This is written by Leah Lakshmi, who's a really great disability justice advocate. And it's got really, you have to fill out your information, but you can download it and it's pretty neat. And then lastly, we've got this other self-assessment tool. It includes sections on inclusionary policies, effective communication, and physical accessibility. So once again, you'd click here, and it opens here. And this one's 36 pages. It's pretty small font, but it has really great, once again, other questions like, does your agency have a policy stating your commitment and intent to comply with the ADA? And maybe yours does or doesn't. And then it has suggestions on what you can do, and you can fill in next steps to take. So once again, really great resources that we also recommend. So let me scroll back up and we'll just review this page one more time. We've got our policy and procedure review tool that we went over, the sample policies that we've developed, that safety and access review tool, our training and education piece with our recorded connectors meeting, and then other tools that we recommend. Any questions? I know that was a lot of information, but any questions before we move on to our resources page about our page here? I'll give it just a second.
I have a quick question. Sorry if this has already been asked. I know this is not published yet, but will the website itself be like, will we get like an email just so we know where to access it?
Yes, absolutely. Great question, Sarah. Yes, you will get an email. I'll have a copy of the recording. And I'm going to be straight up. I have no idea when I'm going to have those things. I'm hoping it'll be within a couple weeks. But regardless, I'll send out an email shortly after this that has some of those things that you may want to know immediately, which is like, who do I contact to do a site review, or some of those maybe brief contact pieces. But I'm hoping within the next couple weeks, we'll have the publishing, the URL, the recording, some of the more specific stuff that might take a little bit more time, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else before we move on to our last section? Awesome. Okay, we're going to move on to the resources page. So I'm going to click on resources, which is our little landing page here. And once again, this is just kind of a landing page. It doesn't have the resources on it, but it'll link you to the other one. So this, once again, there's so many ways to navigate these subpages. We have 4 different subpages. The first one is information on disability justice and disability rights. The second is domestic and sexual violence and disability. The third is local resources. And the last is creating accessible events and content. So if you click on these, it'll navigate you to the page. And then once again, if you scroll down here, it'll navigate you to those same pages. And I also put on here, let's say, you know, we're down the line and folks are going through these resource pages and they're like, you know, we have this thing come up with a survivor, or maybe something come up in our organization and we can't find a resource for it. And it would be really great if you added it onto your web page. I have here to contact Alex and we'll update it. So this, I see this website as a living document, right? It's not always finished, and I hope that we can continue to add to it over the years, even though our Open Doors grant has ended. So if you have a resource that you'd like us to add, we'll get some feedback at the end of this, but maybe as time goes on, please contact Alex and we'll make sure to update the website. Any questions just on this landing page here before we go into our specific pages? All right, I'm going to go back up here to this navigation pane, and I'm going to click on our first one, which is disability justice and disability rights. This is our kind of, once again, this is where we're getting into some more educational information where maybe folks want to read about stuff and say, you know, I don't really know what's going on with disability justice. And maybe I want some more educational information. So that's what this page serves to do for disability justice and disability rights. We start with what is disability justice? We've got a definition here. We link to some really great partners, Sins Invalid, which is a really great disability justice group. We talk about the difference between disability rights and disability justice. Disability justice is the framework that we use. Disability rights was the movement. Disability justice is really recognizing the intersectionality, and it's building on the disability rights movement. We move down here once again, and we link to Sins Invalid, which we have used as a really great framework for a lot of the work that we've done, and we linked their website. They're a great performance project that I can't remember when they were formed, but it links to their website here and here. And down here, we have the 10 principles of disability justice. Once again, this is a pretty foundational framework for disability justice work, and it was created by Sins Invalid, and it links here, and the PDF of it also links here. And it has an image description here, which is pretty cool. Lastly, we have some, as a collaboration over the years, we have found some really cool disability justice activists and groups that we have tended to really appreciate their work, and we really like them. And so our hope is that, you know, these are some of the recommended folks that we like to follow on our social media, or maybe we like this Leah Lakshmi has a recommended reading list. These might be some cool things for you if you're interested in, you know, maybe passively engaging more with disability justice, or even actively engaging more. These are some recommendations that we have. So we have folks like Leah Lakshmi, Imani Barbarin, or Crutches and Spice, Mia Mangus, Alice Wong. We have the Portland Disability Justice Collective, which is a local group, and some of their amazing resources that they've shared with us. Uprise Collective, which is another local group, and the Disability Visibility Project. So once again, these are just some of our favorites that we recommend that have given us some really great education over the years and have really helped us center our activist work. Any questions here on this disability justice and disability rights page? All right, and I'm going to move on to our next resource page. So this one is we're going to learn more about domestic and sexual violence and disability. Actually, I'm going to change that right now. There we go. So in here, this once again is providing education about domestic and sexual violence and the intersection with disability. So we talk about first, how do we define disability? What are the definitions of disability that may crop up in life depending on the circumstance? We talk about the American with Disability Act definition. The World Health Organization has a different definition. And then once again, Sins Invalid, they have a really great definition of disability that is more broad and encompassing. We talk about the medical model of disability and the social model of disability as well. Down here, we have some definitions of domestic and sexual violence that might be helpful for grounding folks in this work and how it relates to the intersection of disability. We also talk about ableism and the definition of ableism. And more specifically, we talk about how ableism shows up in gender-based violence. There's this really great, I link it here, a really great work called Ableism, a Form of Violence Against Women. And they talk about how ableism impacts survivors. So for example, they talk about maybe women with disabilities have limited access to sexual health information because there's a belief that disabled women won't be sexually active and therefore they won't need reliable sexual health and reproductive information. So that, of course, leads to an increased risk for sexual and physical abuse of women with disabilities. So that's like an example, right, of how ableism might show up in the work that we do. And we wanted to link the resource if folks wanted to read more. We also talk about language when referring to folks with disabilities. There's really two kind of prominent ways to refer to folks with disabilities. The first is person-first language, which is maybe saying person with a disability, right? The other is identity-first language, which would be saying something like disabled person. We talk about maybe the pros and cons of both and the view of both both terms within the disability community. Right now, we're kind of seeing a shift away from person-first language towards identity-first language. But we really recommend, when in doubt, that folks still use person-first language and say person with a disability. Often things like identity-first language or disabled person is often perceived as something to be used as a person only by people with disabilities. So we talk about it here, and we also provide some education on the history of person-first language and identity-first language here. Continuing to scroll down, we include the power and control wheel for people with disabilities. I'm going to open it up here. And this is a really great resource. So many of us have seen various iterations of the power and control wheel for various communities. This one is for folks with disabilities. This one is specifically for people in partnered relationships. And I don't know if I've seen one for folks that may be in different kinds of relationships. We know, or it may not be partner abuse, right? We know that folks with disabilities are subject to like caretaker abuse, or they may experience things that are not intimate partner violence, right? But this is a really great resource. We give this out all the time. It talks about things like emotional abuse, isolation, sexual abuse, withholding support or treatment, which is something that folks experience a lot. And so this can be a really helpful tool when working with survivors, and it also provides really great education. So we link that there, as well as the website where this version of the power and control wheel was developed. Lastly, at the bottom here, we have some additional resources and reading and just places that we recommend for further education. The Vera Institute of Justice has this really great website. It's called End Abuse of People with Disabilities. And I'm going to just go there really quick. It is a phenomenal website that I would highly recommend for anyone. We link this several times on our website. And I'll give you a brief overview. What I would recommend mainly is their resource library. So if you're on the main page here and you go to Tools and Training, you can go down to their resource library, and they have all kinds of trainings and webinars. So you can even search by the type of folks that you're, or type of disability specifically. that you're looking for support on. So maybe you want to look for resources for folks with mental health disabilities. I'm going to say search. And so they have really great, oh gosh, did it go away? Anyway, so they have really great examples of trainings here. Service animals, assistant animals, emotional support animals, centering survivors with disabilities in your organizational policies. They have great trainings on here. So I'd recommend this resource library highly. This was put together. I cannot remember who put together this recommendation. I think it was a collaboration of folks. Yeah, here we go. So this was a collaboration of folks, including Leah Lakshmi, once again, who's an incredible disability justice leader. And this is recommendations for advancing disability justice in Oregon and Southwest Washington, which is a great read. This has a timeline of the disability movement, which may be educational. And then lastly, this one has an anti-ableist glossary of disability terms. So you can scroll through this and look through some different terms that might be helpful to use. So once again, on this page, we've got definitions of disability and how we, various ways that we might define it. We've got how we define domestic and sexual violence. We have how we define ableism. Language to use when referring to people with disabilities. The power and control wheel for folks with disabilities. And then additional resources and reading. Do folks have any questions on this page before we move on? All right. Now we're going to go to the local resources page. On this page, we've got two different sections here. The first is we've got a couple best practice tips to support survivors with disabilities. We pulled this from a training that we did, and this, of course, is not an extensive list of best practice tips. Once again, we link that resource library, which has a way more extensive list of how to support survivors with disabilities. These are just some quick tips that may or may not be helpful in your work with survivors. Our thought is that, survivors may need help with accommodations, or they may need some other types of support, and having examples may be a helpful starting off point for people. So in terms of accommodations, we have folks ask directly about disabilities and accommodations. We never want to assume that someone needs something or doesn't need something. I heard an example of someone saying that, like, someone opened the door for them, and they didn't need that. And in fact, what happened is that they fell through the door. So we never want to assume that someone needs our help. We always want to ask and make sure that the person feels empowered with the accommodation that we are offering. Another is to share an example of an accommodation. Maybe people don't know what to ask. Maybe they don't know that something is or is not available. I think a lot of folks with disabilities kind of assume that things are just not there. And so they assume that they have to assume or adapt to the able-bodied space that they're in. And so people just kind of go without. So sharing an example of what you can and what you cannot offer can also be really helpful. Being transparent about the impacts of accommodations is another really great suggestion that we have for folks. In the training that we hosted, one example that we gave was working with a survivor who's maybe applying for a restraining order. Maybe the survivor says that they need more, or maybe, sorry, let me back up. Maybe you're noticing that a survivor needs more time with paperwork, and that maybe it's going to take them like a good 2 days to fill out the paperwork for a restraining order. But maybe that would impact their safety. And maybe the survivor doesn't want to take 2 days to fill out the paperwork. Being really transparent about the impact of what's going to happen if we take the full 2 days to fill out paperwork, what's going to happen if we rush it and maybe we don't take the time that you really need to give you the accommodation. How is that going to impact your safety? All of those things can be really helpful. And then continue to ask about accommodations as you work together. I think a lot of people don't take into account dynamic disability, which means that maybe one day you're doing fine, the next day you're doing pretty poorly. And so it's always really important to ask about disability every time that you work together, as it can change. We also have other options of support that you can offer folks that may or may not be helpful. Things like establishing physical and emotional safety, limiting chaos, planning for more time, using different modes of learning, like walking people through tasks, using videos, providing information in writing, using drawing. We also have things like suggesting reminders or checklists or calendars. And we also have here to be structured but flexible. Some people really thrive with structure, and then some people really need more flexibility. And so it's kind of gauging what the survivor needs. Are they really going to thrive with more structure, or are they going to thrive with a more flexible schedule? Once again, we really highly recommend this resource library. They have specific tips on specific communities of survivors, other best practice examples. These are just a few that we would recommend. And then down here, we have a few more resources. We have some links to local disability service providers. This is not a comprehensive list of all of the amazing providers in our community, but this could be a good starting point for folks. I know between this list here, someone's going to point you in the right direction of resources for whatever you're needing. And then down here, we have other pages for domestic and sexual violence and sex trafficking resources. So these are our various county web pages for these resources. Any questions on this local resources page? All right. We're going to go to our last page, which is creating accessible events and content. And we really wanted to include this. I think it's important to me, especially when I think about COVID and long COVID and how we're trying to do meetings differently, and maybe the services that we're offering are looking different. Maybe we're trying to do hybrid support group, or maybe people are requesting in-person services again. That can be really difficult to navigate. And so we wanted to have this page to make sure that our events and meetings that we're hosting, people have tips for accessibility in case they want it. And then we also have some tips for creating accessible content at the end. I know a lot of folks have questions like, what is plain language? What font size should I be using? Is there a recommended font style that I should use? How can I create content that is accessible to folks who are blind or low vision? All of those questions we get a lot from folks. So we want to include information on that. So we're going to start with tips for accessible meetings and events. These are some examples of tips to create an accessible event. Once again, this is not an extensive list. These are things, though, that we have found helpful as a collaboration as we've hosted meetings and events. These are pulled from other resources as well. So things like asking about accommodations when you send out a registration form, reviewing your venue or location prior to make sure that it has the accessibility features that you need, giving yourself enough time to secure accommodations. Often, maybe you'll get an accommodation request that you don't have the tools for, and you're going to need some extra time to secure those. Making sure that you have ASL translation at your event, even if it wasn't a requested accommodation. Maybe you're going to be recording your meeting and you want access for folks who would be viewing the meeting in the future. Having masks on hand for in-person events and encouraging mask wearing if folks are able to, in order to protect immunocompromised folks. And then continuing to keep physical distancing in mind when planning your event. So doing things like spacing out chairs and tables, maybe blocking off certain areas or modifying layouts. That can all help to stop of spreading COVID-19, which is still, as we know, very present. And we want to be really mindful when we have in-person events. We have a couple other resources. Once again, this is here's our resource library, which has really great event tips. And then this is one from the New York State Office for People with Disabilities. I'll open this in a new tab. They have like an accessible event planning guide, which I think is pretty cool. And they have some examples of things that you can do. Location considerations here, considerations for the interior of the event space. I thought it was pretty neat and wanted to include it as a resource. Moving on down here, this is where we list some specific examples of accommodations for both in-person and virtual events. Once again, maybe you can't offer these things. These are just examples that may be helpful. I think it can always be difficult when folks are with a survivor and they're like, what accommodation do you need? And they're like, I don't know. What do you have? And maybe you're like, I don't know. What do I have? And so I wanted to provide some examples that maybe you can put on your registration form, or maybe you can just kind of keep this list in your back pocket as an example of something that you can offer. And always know that there's an option for other. Maybe folks need different things than this, and the point is that we still want to remain flexible. Once again, I'd highly recommend this resource library. They're going to have additional examples of accommodations other than these that you can offer survivors. And Google is always a great resource for brainstorming. So for example, for in-person events, wheelchair and mobility device access, amplified sound, maybe you want a quiet break space during events or scheduled breaks. This one was a new one that I thought was lovely. Someone recommended this to me the other day. Maybe having someone to serve as like a guide for someone who has sensory disabilities. Maybe someone who is blind or low vision or deaf or hard of hearing needs someone to walk with them during the event and guide them around. Having materials in over 14-point font. Maybe you need interpretation or visual description of materials. I also really like the option to opt out of interactive portions of events. People maybe have anxiety and they just don't want to do it. And I think that that should always be an option. We have very similar ones for virtual events. Having alt text for visuals, accessible or electronically accessible materials for screen readers. The option to keep off your camera and microphone during an event. I really don't like meetings where I have to be told to keep my microphone or camera on, because I just don't think that's accessible. Maybe people don't want to. Maybe that gives them anxiety. And I think that if we're providing access, that should always be an option. So we've got some of these examples. Once again, this is not a comprehensive list, but my hope is that this can give folks a really good starting off point if they want to offer folks accommodations for the services that they have, the events that they have, those kind of things. Any questions on this first section here, which is focused on accessible meetings and events? All right. And we'll move down to this next section. This was created by my amazing coworker, Lee. They were the project director before me, and they created this really great section on creating accessible content. Once again, we have a lot of questions about making sure that maybe your flyers or your program flyers or handouts or the forms that you have for survivors to sign, making sure that those are keeping accessibility in mind. So once again, a lot of these resources are from that End of Use website, which I'm going to continue to highlight, and their resource library, which we went over. So we talk about accessible fonts. That's from End of Use. They talk about font style, size, line spacing, plain language. They talk about what is plain language and why it's important for survivors. This one talks about augmented language. This one talks about color contrast. And I believe these are all videos. So these are all trainings. These are not just like handout materials. This one talks about alternative text, or alt text as we commonly refer to it as, and why it's important. This one talks about organizing information and how we can create information that is super accessible for folks to digest. Down here, we have how to design accessible resource tip sheets. So this is how to create organization, or how to plan and print digital resources that are accessible to people with disabilities as well as deaf individuals. So we've got those resources here. We have a couple other resources on plain language. And then this other resource down here is how to create trauma-informed material. Any questions on the tips for creating accessible content section? Well, I think that might be it. I think we've gone over our entire website. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to stop screen sharing really quick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to end our, actually, do folks have any questions? Let me actually go, sorry, I'm doing this backwards. I'm going to share my screen again. Do folks have any questions before we jump into our feedback section? I'll give it just a second. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording.